I want you to picture a bridge. For that bridge to be safe, the concrete needs to be solid. The steel cables holding it up need to be tight and strong. If the concrete crumbles, then the bridge fails. If the cables snap, the bridge fails. In the human body, your bones are the concrete and your muscles are the cables. For decades in medicine, we've treated them like they were completely separate projects. We worried about osteoporosis or weak bones, or we worried about sarcopenia, which is muscle loss. But what happens when the concrete is crumbling and the cables are loose at the same time? We call this condition Osteosarcopenia. In the medical literature, it's starting to be known as the Hazardous Duo, and for good reason. When you have both weak bones and weak muscles, your risk of falling skyrockets, and your risk of breaking something when you land is even higher. Today, I'm going to walk you through a systematic review published in Geriatric Nursing in 2026. It asks a simple but critical question: can exercise fix this hazardous duo? And more importantly, what kind of exercise works? Let's step back and look at the problem this paper addresses. As our population ages, we are seeing more geriatric syndromes. You likely know about osteoporosis. That's low bone mineral density, diagnosed by a DEXA scan. You may also know about sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass and strength that comes with aging. Osteosarcopenia is the existence of both. It's a relatively new clinical definition, but the impact is massive. It leads to frailty, higher mortality, and a cycle of decline that's hard to break. The researchers in this review wanted to know if physical exercise is effective, specifically for people diagnosed with this double trouble condition. They weren't looking for general fitness advice. They wanted hard data on whether exercise changes the numbers on a bone scan or a muscle test for these specific patients. They started by sweeping the major medical databases, PubMed, Scopus, Cochrane, looking for randomized clinical trials. They screened 250 articles. Now here's the first shocker, and it tells you exactly where we stand in the scientific timeline. Out of 250 potential studies, how many do you think met the gold standard criteria for treating osteosarcopenia with exercise? 4. Just 4 studies in total. We're looking at data from only 195 participants. This tells us that while we talk about this condition a lot, high-quality research specifically targeting it is still in its infancy. However, the data we do have from these 195 brave souls gives us some very clear signals about what we should be doing in the gym. Let's get into the results. What happens when you take an older adult with weak bones and weak muscles and put them on an exercise program? First, let's talk about the intervention itself. In all 4 studies that made the cut, the medicine was resistance training. We aren't talking about a gentle stroll in a park. We're talking about weight machines or elastic bands that were resistance bands. And these participants were generally older, ranging anywhere from about 60 to 80 years old. So what did the resistance training do? I have 3 main takeaways for you. Finding number 1, muscles responded beautifully, regardless of whether patients use fancy gym machines or simple elastic resistance bands. Resistance training significantly improved muscle strength and muscle mass. One study specifically looked at the skeletal muscle mass index and saw a clear increase. This is excellent news. It confirms that even in your late 70s, even with a diagnosis of osteosarcopenia, your muscles are not dead. They're just dormant. If you provide the stimulus, resistance, they will wake up and get stronger. Finding number 2. Bones are stubborn. The results for bone mineral density, or BMD, were conflicting. 2 of the studies showed no significant improvement in bone density, but the other 2 did. Why the difference? Well, it comes down to time. The studies that failed to show bone growth were short, about 12 weeks long. The study that showed significant improvement in the lumbar spine and hip ran for 78 weeks. This is actually a crucial lesson in biology. Muscle is metabolically faster. It repairs and grows relatively quickly. Bone is slow. It's like turning an ocean liner. A 12-week program is simply not enough time to remodel the skeleton. If you want better bones, you have to be in it for the long haul. Finding number 3. Strength doesn't always equal speed. This was the most surprising finding for many. You would assume that if your legs are stronger, you would walk faster and balance better. But the review found that resistance training did not significantly improve physical performance metrics like gait speed or the timed up and go test in most of the studies. There was one exception where women using elastic bands saw better gait speed, but overall, just getting strong didn't automatically make people move faster. So how do I translate these 4 studies into advice that I give my patients, or how should you interpret this study if you or a loved one has been told that you have osteopenia or osteoporosis? When you look at this, the prescription is pretty clear. We need resistance training. The review highlights that both machines and elastic bands work. This is important for accessibility. You don't necessarily need a gym membership. A set of inexpensive resistance bands used at home, provided you're using them correctly and consistently, can drive that muscle growth. But you have to manage your expectations regarding time. I often see patients get discouraged when they have a bone density scan less than a year after starting a gym routine and the numbers have not moved. This review validates what we know about physiology. Bone remodeling takes time. If you're starting an exercise program to fight osteosarcopenia, you are signing a contract for at least a year, preferably a lifetime. Don't judge the success of your bone health based on a 12-week program. The study showed the best results from hip and spine bone density increase lasted over a year and a half of having to do strength training. Furthermore, we need to talk about the disconnect between strength and speed. If you only sit in a machine and push a weight, you get really good at pushing weight. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll walk faster to catch a bus. This suggests that while resistance training is the foundation, it may not be the whole house. We likely need to practice movement, walking, stepping, balancing alongside heavy lifting. Now I want to offer my perspective as a physician, looking at the nuance that a systematic review sometimes misses. First, let's talk about the hazardous duo concept again. In clinical practice, we often treat these things in silos. You often see an endocrinologist for your bones and a physical therapist for your muscles. This paper reinforces that it is the same patient. The mechanisms overlap. Resistance training targets both muscles and bones, but at different speeds. I'm slightly concerned by the small sample size. 195 people is a tiny group to draw global conclusions from. However, the safety profile is reassuring. These were older adults, some with obesity, some with significant frailty, and they managed resistance training effectively. Often, we baby older adults, fearing that weights will hurt them. The data suggests the opposite. Not loading tissues is what hurts them in the long run. One thing the paper mentions briefly, which I think is critical, is nutrition. Some of the studies included protein supplementation or calcium and vitamin D along the exercise. You cannot build muscle out of thin air, and you cannot build bone without minerals. In the real world, I never prescribe exercise without really taking a comprehensive look at what people are taking into their bodies. If you're lifting weights but eating tea and toast, you aren't going to see the results those studies showed. Also, the lack of improvement in physical performance, like walking speed, tells me that we really need to do what we call multi-component training. Resistance training is non-negotiable for tissue structure, but we probably need to add anaerobic activity and balance training to get the functional benefits. You need the strength to stand, but you also need the coordination to walk without falling. To wrap this up, osteosarcopenia, the combination of muscle wasting and bone loss, is a major challenge for healthy aging. It's the perfect storm for fractures and disability. The evidence from 2026 is preliminary, but promising. It tells us that resistance training is a potent medicine. It works fast on the muscles, increasing muscle mass and strength. It works slowly on the bones, requiring dedication over a year or more to see changes in the hip and spine. So if you're listening to this and you're over 60, or you are caring for someone who is, or considering yourself in the future, do not fear the weights. Whether it's a machine at the gym or yellow elastic band in your living room, resistance is the signal your body is waiting for. The concrete can be reinforced, the cables can be tightened. You just have to do the work, and you have to give it time. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.